This is Metal Mike, and in this episode I'm joined with my buddy Anthony, the hair metal guru, and we talk hair metal's most underappreciated albums. You know the albums we're talking about. They always get overshadowed by those big sellers, albums like Slippery When Wet, Stay Hungry. Well, we're rooting for the underdogs in this episode. Make sure you check out Anthony's channel, The Hair Metal Haven, and most importantly, check the description of this video. I need you to go online and sign the petition aimed at Motley Crue to release a reissue box set of their epic, underappreciated album, Motley 94. So that's what we're looking for next year as fans. We want to see Motley do a reissue or box set or something to celebrate this album. Sign the petition in the description of the video below. Well, get ready to rock with us, man. Check it out. All right, Anthony, welcome to the, I was about to say your name of your show. Welcome to the 80's Glam Metalcast, man. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. So if you know him from Twitter, he's the hair metal guru. Where did that name come from?
You know, I've been such a fan of this genre of music for so many years, and I read so much about it. And listen to it and think about it. And when I was coming up with the name, it just seemed to kind of to catch, you know, the guru of all things hair metal. And not that I think I'm that. There's probably others who know more. But anyway, it stuck. And so now I'm the guru on Twitter. So.
Awesome. And then on YouTube, you've got the Hair
Metal Haven.
Hair Metal Haven. Okay. And
yep.
You just started the channel. You've got a couple cool videos out. You've ranked Poison, Warrant, Cinderella, and Skid Row. A lot of the big ones. Give that channel a plug, man.
Yeah, it's a Hair Metal Haven on YouTube. I also, in fact, have a Facebook page that's called Classic Rock Fargo. I'm in North Dakota, but Hair Metal Haven. I've been doing a video every Sunday night, ranking the albums, but that's not going to be the sole focus. I also plan on getting into, my favorite underground hair metal bands, and maybe my favorite hair metal ballads. So there will be a variety of topics, but it's brand new. But I've already. I'm getting 300 views, and I'm appreciative of anybody who takes their time to watch a couple minutes. So, so it's brand new, but it's going well so far.
Awesome. I've been enjoying it, man. You're a funny guy. You got some good takes on there, and you know your stuff, so it's all good.
No, thanks a lot. And you've been an inspiration for me, watching your videos and following you on Twitter, and kind of, I was, in fact, watching your videos, and I thought, you know what? Like I've always wanted to do that. Why can't I do that? So I appreciate, you kind of leading the way, and I appreciate you supporting my channel. So yeah, man, it's been awesome. You
got it, man. Anytime. Well, tonight we are going to talk about these underappreciated hair metal albums, because if we go through the catalogs, man, some of the big ones, you look at albums like Stay Hungry, Slippery When Wet, Out of the Cellar, Final Countdown. You know what I mean? These are the albums in all those respective bands' catalogs that get the attention. But there's other great albums in all bands' catalogs that kind of get pushed under the rug or get forgotten about. You agree with that?
Oh yeah, and some of my favorite albums are those ones that didn't quite make it, to the big time. So it's a great topic, and it was hard for me to narrow it down to 15. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about these undiscovered maybe nuggets that people know the bands but don't know the albums.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to look at it, Anthony. Some of it is like some of these albums that we talked about that are big sellers could have been 12 million copies, and then the next one only is 1 million, and it's looked at as a failure. But another way to look at it too is internet chatter, right? So there's a lot of albums out there that nobody cared really that much about, 30 years ago, but today they become legendary. Albums like Motley 94, and there's a lot of other ones that come to mind. The internet chatter around these albums is pretty positive compared to like when this album was panned when it came out. So it's interesting how some of it could be based on sales. That was the big album, but then other albums have grown to like a legendary status. Badlands is another one. I mean, people are freaking crazy over Badlands.
Metal Mike, hey man, you got to be careful. You bring up Motley Crue 94 and Badlands there in like a minute span, and you know that our buddy A Fish on Twitter is going to have a heart attack if he hears those two bands. So,
maybe it's all the internet chatters just coming from one person. I don't know.
Yep. But he is keeping those two albums alive, and I'm right with him on Motley Crue '94. I'm still working on my love for Badlands, but yep. Two albums, that fit right into what we're talking about.
Perfect. Well, why don't we just jump right in, man? Let's hear your 15.
Okay. Well, you just talked about that there are bands that have albums that have sold millions of copies, and I'm going to start off with one. So in 1980, there was an album release called Back in Black, and I'm going to go on record saying that Back in Black is possibly my favorite album of all time.
Okay.
Sold 25 million copies, and everyone knows that album. But in 1988, AC/DC came out with an album called Blow Up Your Video, and I think that album is phenomenal, and it's so you never hear anybody talk about it. You hear the For Those About to Rock, the follow up to Back in Black, and then the album that followed Blow Up Your Video, The Razor's Edge, was also huge because of Thunderstruck. But Blow Up Your Video, it did go platinum. But, for a band like AC/DC, platinum is kind of considered the bottom of the barrel.
Yep.
I might like the Blow Up Your Video album so much because it was one of the first ones that I got. I think I bought it from BMG, the 12 tapes for a penny. So those fuckers are still coming after me, probably for that album. But I'm going to plug one song on it. I think Heat Seeker was Thunderstruck before Thunderstruck. So that's my first album is AC/DC's Blow Up Your Video.
Dude, that is a great example of exactly what we're talking about. Back in Black was huge. For Those About to Rock was huge. Fly on the Wall, obviously, and Flick the Switch, and some of those were not as big. But
right.
I agree with. I'm not even an AC/DC fan, and I like Blow Up Your Video. I thought Heat Seeker was great, and I thought That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll is a super cool song. And that you're right. And then what happens? And this is a thing that's going to keep coming up. I think throughout the whole podcast is there these albums that kind of get sandwiched into like these killers. And obviously, Razor's Edge was a monster album for them. Like, whoever thought they would ever get that big again, but they did. So, this is a perfect example. Glad you brought it up. I'm not a huge DC fan, but I do like this album. Especially, I thought those two singles were great.
And just the fact that you're not a huge AC/DC fan makes me wonder what the hell is wrong with you. But I'm going to excuse it for now. But just man, you got to work on that because that's as American as it's not. They're not an American band, but man, loving AC/DC is like loving mom's apple pie. So
you just lost all credibility when you said they were American.
I know they're from Australia. If anybody's from Australia's out there.
They are American rock. America loves AC/DC. So
right,
you're on point. All right, so my number 15. This one's a little bit more of a weird one, but I'm going to try to explain where I'm coming from. I'm going to go with the Shotgun Messiah debut. And the reason why, and this is going to be one of those examples I'm going to use for the internet chatter. So I feel like all I ever see online is people posting about Second Coming. Everybody loves Second Coming. Sirius XM plays Heartbreak Boulevard like crazy. A lot of people talk about Violent New Breed because that was like their album where they went into the industrial stuff, and that's where Tim Skold has kind of been now for the rest of his career. So to me, and really too, Tim became the vocalist for anything that followed. You know what I mean? For Shotgun Messiah. And this is the only album with Zinny Zan. And I love Zinny Zan. And I think that's a guy that doesn't get enough credit. His voice on the album is really cool. Like, I feel like he's got like a punky, kind of Joe Elliott sounding clear voice, but then he can screech like, like Tom Kiefer or Steven Tyler or something like that. So I love that guy. I talked to him a couple times. He's really cool. And, I don't know if they probably sold about the same. I don't know that the sales are that much different, but I love the debut, and I don't feel like it gets enough attention anymore. And just a couple of my favorites on there, like Bop City, Don't Care About Nothing, Nowhere Fast. It's just so good. And I don't know if you have noticed this too, but I feel like the main focus, and so many people are so hyped on Second Coming, that the debut just kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Oh, I completely agree, and I always wonder, why they got rid of Zinny Zan, because his vocals were phenomenal on that first album, and maybe it's a personality
Could have
issue.
been, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Second Coming, and man, there's a phenomenal ballad on that album called Free. Anyway, but yeah, you never hear about the debut, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's such a great album, and now I know I got to listen. In fact, Zinny Zan had a solo album called Zan Clan.
Yep.
And there was some really good stuff on there, and his voice is so unique, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a great example of what we're talking about.
And the only other thing I want to throw in is that I don't know what it was about when that came out in '91. I don't know if I just lost interest in Shotgun Messiah, or I wasn't pleased with the singer change. I don't know what it was, but I never bought the album, never really paid any attention to it. Of course, because of all the hype online, I try to go back, but now I almost wonder if it's too late. Like it's just not registering with me, or maybe it never will. So Second Coming and me, we don't hang out, I guess.
That's one of my favorite things about Twitter, though, and in fact, what we're doing right now is being reminded of these bands that you forget about over time, and Shotgun Messiah, that's a great example. I mean, I haven't listened to that debut album in forever, so I mean, now I'm gonna go back and revisit it, and that's what's awesome about what we're doing.
Sweet, man. Number 14.
Okay, so I just did a video on this band. And one of the comments I made was, when I was 16 years old, I don't think I related to a band more than I did Skid Row. First album sells 5 million copies. In my opinion, there was a time where they were the biggest band in the world. Yep. Slave to the Grind, goes number 1 on Billboard, sells 2 million copies. I did in my video talk about Subhuman Race being the ultimate shit show. But they put out an album in 2003 called Thick Skin. Now, it might have gone platinum or gold. It might have gone aluminum, because I'm one of the only ones, I think, who bought it. But it had a new singer, Johnny Solinger. And there was some catchy stuff on that. They did. Now, it was actually really controversial. They did a kind of a punk cover of I Remember You called I Remember You Too. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't bear even the slightest resemblance, except for the lyrics, to the original, but I think it's phenomenal. There's some great ballads on there. There's a couple awesome rock songs. Born a Beggar, Thick as the Skin, One Light, and See You Around were phenomenal ballads. I remember an interview with Rachel Bolan, he said a couple years after it was released that he felt that album should have been huge, and because of the time it couldn't have been, but there's some phenomenal stuff. So I completely agree that album deserved way more than it got.
When I watched that video of yours, I remember this album. I definitely liked it when it came out, but I haven't listened to it much in recent years, so I've got to go back. But yeah, you make a great point that there was probably no shot for them to be big in that time frame in the early 2000s. Right. So yeah, but it definitely that is a lost album for sure.
Right, and 2003, and I know we're keeping it to 80s bands, but yeah, that was I thought that was such a great album. I didn't mention the song Ghost, maybe my favorite song on the album. It was the one song that got a video, but most of those bands, unless you were even Def Leppard, I mean, stuff they were releasing in the 2000s wasn't going to sell, but no. Skid Row especially, I mean, that album died upon release, but it's unfortunate.
All right, man. I agree with you. Number 14. This one, like I said, I feel like a couple of these earlier ones, I'm going to have to explain myself, and then as we get going, I don't think I'll have to as much because I think they're going to fit the mold perfectly. But for 14, hear me out. I put Vinnie Vincent Invasion, All Systems Go. And I think, once again, I know this album had some traction when it came out. That time of year was on MTV, and then when Vinnie Vincent was dressed up as Freddy Krueger for Love Kills, But there's a couple things that have happened in more recent times. Number one, Vinnie Vincent hates this album, okay? He doesn't like it because he doesn't like Mark Slaughter. And he didn't want Mark Slaughter. He feels that Mark Slaughter was pushed on him. This is talked about on one of my videos. See how we're giving our videos plugs? This is good, right?
Yep.
When I interviewed Robert Fleischman, he kind of explained why Vinny doesn't like Mark Slaughter. So I think that's... So on Vinny's side, you're never going to hear him talk highly of this album. But then I think over time, the debut is really kind of... once again, it's that internet chatter or that online stuff. The debut gets all the attention because it's over the top, all the crazy Boys Are Gonna Rock video and all the craziness that surrounds that. And Back on the Streets is probably his most infamous song because so many people have covered it. And, it's so, to me, I just feel like this album, because of some of those factors, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But I think it's the best Vinnie Vincent album. I love Mark Slaughter. I don't mind Robert Fleischman. I like Robert Fleischman. Let me rephrase that. I like Robert Fleischman because I
he's not going to hear that part.
But I do like All Systems Go better. I do like Mark Slaughter in the band a little bit better. Great songs like That Time of Year we mentioned. Ashes to Ashes, Let Freedom Rock. Ecstasy is such a cool, weird ballad. It's just got some of that Vinny weirdness in there. Once again, I don't think either one was reached any kind of certification. But I think over time, I'm not sure. Like I said, maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. I just feel like the debut gets a lot of the attention, and Vinny will never give any kind of credit to this album because of Mark Slaughter. So.
Oh, completely. And is there more of a lost soul than Vinnie Vincent?
No.
I mean, look at what he's going through now. Every time he tries to schedule something, he backs out.
Yeah.
And the guy is so immensely talented. I mean, he's almost responsible for bringing Kiss back. I mean, he wrote some of their biggest songs when he was in the band.
Yep, I agree.
He had the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, which had some great stuff. And man, I wish he would just get it together. But yeah, it's unfortunate that he disowns. But I mean, look at the band. He had Bobby Rock on drums.
Yep.
He had, Dana Strum and Mark Slaughter. I mean, that's a phenomenal band. I mean, I wish he could have kept that together and seen what they could have accomplished over a couple albums. Now, I mean, I guess I do really like the Slaughter Stick It To You album.
Me too.
After that, they kind of lose me. So, I mean, the fact that BVI broke up, we did get that album. But yeah, it's unfortunate that the guy hasn't done more with his music career.
So, just to piggyback on that, I follow Robert Fleischman and message him back and forth every once in a while. And I did see that he's like, he told me that when I talked to him, he's working on like an industrial type of an album, which is kind of weird. Like, why would you do industrial now?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
That would have been cool, like in the early 2000s. I don't know about now.
Yeah.
But he's doing like a electronic type album, which could be cool. But he said that he finished the vocals for the newest Vinnie Vincent Invasion album. So there's something cooking, and he said that it was going to be October. So we'll see if this all happens. But yeah, kind of exciting.
Well, there's always a lot of promises and very little follow through with Vinny, but I hope it comes out because you can't have too much music. So hey, release it, run it up the flagpole, see who salutes it.
Yep.
I'll shoot it if I can get it online. I don't know that I'd want to hear a little bit before I was going to go out and buy it on vinyl or buy it on CD. But the guy's obviously a talented songwriter.
And I wouldn't prepay for it either.
Right? Yeah. Yep. Just like all those meet and greets where Vinny fucked me over.
Yep, it happened. All right, brother. I'm about 13.
Okay. So I'm a huge Warrant fan.
Me too.
All right. I have two Warrant songs tattooed on my arm. The very first video I did on my channel was a ranking of the Warrant albums. I've seen Warrant with Janie, I bet 30 times and got to hang out with them and was pulled on stage once. And in fact, it's on YouTube.
Nice.
So I have a huge history with Warrant, and obviously for two albums, they were huge. Their DRFSR and Cherry Pie both go double platinum. Cherry Pie goes up to number 7 on Billboard. And you may think right now that I'm probably going to talk about Dog Eat Dog, but I'm not. I could. I love Dog Eat Dog, but still, that album I think made it to gold.
Yep.
But the album Ultraphobic. From 1995, I feel is just so underrated. Now, I'm going to clear, Ultraphobic is basically a grunge album, but it is good grunge. I like grunge if it's done right. So it didn't really sell. It probably sold, 10 copies, and I bought 3 of them. I have Stronger Now from that song tattooed on my arm. I remember an interview with Janie Lane. He said that he thought that was the best song he ever wrote. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's another ballad on that album called High that may be the best ballad he ever wrote. It's phenomenal. So you can't look at it and expect another Cherry Pie or another even Dog Eat Dog. It's not like that. But if you go into it with an open mind, it is a phenomenal. The lyrics are deep. Every song is catchy. And just to show what Warrant was dealing with, I remember when it was first coming out, and they released a single to a radio station, but did not put the band name on it. and rumor has it that the radio station loved it, started playing it like it was this new grunge band, but as soon as they found out it was Warrant, they pulled it. So that's what they were up against. The album, online, on Twitter, there are a lot of people who love that album, but unfortunately, it never got the shot that it deserved.
Yeah, I remember when this was released, and one of my friends was big into it, and I couldn't stand it. You know what I mean? I looked at it like Warrant completely sold out because
totally.
Because I looked at Dog Eat Dog as being super creative and taking like the hair metal idea, but just kind of making it more original and more unique. Yep. And I think that's what a lot of that I would have loved to have seen. This has come up a million times on this podcast, but I think we all would have loved to seen the genre grow and evolve, just like so many other bands during time have been given that right to grow. These bands never were. But there is a but. So when I say but, when I go back, I really think the song Undertow is great. I think Stronger Now is good. So I've come to appreciate this a little more, in more recent years. And the other point that I'm just going to make, I'm glad that you've got some 90s albums. I did only albums from the 80s because I feel like if I did Underappreciated, almost every single album would be from the 90s. Like I would do Psycho Schizophrenia by Lillian X or Dog Eat Dog, Winger Pull. So I didn't touch any of those because I feel like for me, I've talked about them a million times. But I'm glad that you did it. Because that's a great one. Because I kind of thought you were going to do Dog Eat Dog. I'm glad you did Ultraphobic.
I still remember I was pissed off the first time I heard Ultraphobic. I'm like, why would you guys sell out like that? But it was a grower. The first 3 or 4 listens, I was still like, well, Stronger Now is very good. High's good. I kind of like the song Ultraphobic, but then just the more I listened to it. And knowing what happened to Janie Lane, I mean, how his life fell apart. Yep. You can say that it was an honest representation of what was going on in his life because a lot of those lyrics are really desperate, and his life was probably beginning to be in a desperate situation. So if you want honesty in music, Ultraphobic is about as honest as you're going to get.
The only thing that confuses me about this whole era of music, when I look at the CMC record releases, they're trying to bring these bands back, and there's no way, like you said, if it's Warrant, it's not going to fly. It doesn't matter what it is. And I never understood why these bands still wanted to take a swing at, like, stardom and success and go grunge. Same thing with Dokken, you know what I mean? Because, you might as well just appease your fans and do, like, a regular, straight-up rock record. So this was a confusing era for the bands and for the fans, but that was only head scratcher. I'm like, why didn't these bands just kind of be themselves because it doesn't matter anyways.
And don't you think that later on, eventually they did start realizing, you know what, it's not gonna work.
No.
So bands like Winger, bands like Warrant, I mean, when they've released albums recently, it does harken back to their earlier stuff.
Definitely.
But for a while there, and I think, if you look at history, Rolling Stones did disco.
Exactly.
Kiss did disco, and it worked. Kiss had "I Was Made for Loving You," so maybe they thought, shit, maybe people will give it a shot. Well, now we know that they could have written "Yesterday" by the Beatles, and nobody was going to put it on the radio.
Nope.
And which is unfortunate, but so everybody gave it a shot, and maybe even for a couple albums, and finally they just said, you know what, let's go back to what we do best and what our original fans want.
So for my 13, I've got Bon Jovi, and I've got the debut. This is an album I think that totally gets disregarded, because obviously Slippery When Wet is just like a monster. It sold 12 million copies. They claim that this sold 1 million copies, but I think it took a long time to do it. You know what I mean? I think once Bon Jovi got big, then this album became a million seller. But let's face it, Bon Jovi was not very big for a while. For between the first two albums, they were openers, and then this thing exploded. But I think out of all of it, I think this is the album that gets lost in the shuffle the most out of the original run, say from Here to maybe Keep the Faith. But it's so good, man. It's songs like Roulette, Shot Through the Heart, Love Lies. I could list them all. They're really good. obviously Runaway and She Don't Know Me are cool songs. But and this is an era that the band pays no mind to. This band, let's face it, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but like Bon Jovi can't sing really at all anymore. So he can't sing this kind of material, you know what I mean? And they've really just discard, like you just talked about, like when Winger and Warrant or Motley Crue or whatever try to do something newer now, they do try to harken back to some of their old stuff. Bon Jovi's the complete opposite. He never harkens back anymore to his old stuff. They can't do it. He can't do it musically. The look, obviously, he's gone gray. I'm not saying he's a bad looking guy or anything. I'm just saying he ain't gonna be pulling off the 86 look, you know what I mean?
Right.
And he's one of those artists that have moved on from this, and it's hard for us fans who love this kind of music and really dig that first run of albums, you know what I mean, that this is all just kind of like a memory, you know what I mean? It's toast. But I just think this one is one of those ones that just totally gets lost in the shuffle. I love it. I like talking about it, and that's what I got.
I did not expect that at all. I did not expect a Bon Jovi album from you.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed with that. And you're right. Outside of is She Don't Know Me is on that, right?
Yep.
And Runaway was and I know that Bon Jovi, they still do Runaway live, and I think that's because that's the song that broke them, that enabled them to keep making albums. But don't you kind of think that John has always had this desire to be kind of another Bruce Springsteen versus a heavy metal guy?
Totally. Yep, I agree.
So it seems to me that once the hair started getting shorter, and obviously he's gonna struggle to hit those notes. If you've seen recent live footage, man, it's kind of a shit show.
Yeah, it's rough.
How they're playing those. So I think he's going into his, okay, I'm gonna be the boss, the boss junior, and I'm gonna write these serious, lighter songs, and that's the road I'm gonna go down. But absolutely, I still love Slippery When Wet. Mm-hmm. I still love New Jersey.
Yep.
And around Keep the Faith, there was some good songs on that, but they started to lose me a little bit.
Yep.
But that first album, I really, that's another one that I need to go revisit, because outside of those two songs, I really have forgotten it.
Yeah, and I think though a lot of the other deep tracks that I mentioned are even better for me than those songs. So I love jamming on that album.
That's awesome. That's a good call.
All right, man. Number 12.
Number 12. Okay. So in 1988, Kix released the album "Blow My Fuse," went platinum, got to number 46 on Billboard. Couple great hits, "Don't Close Your Eyes" and one of my favorite songs of the genre, "Cold Blood." But in '91, they released "Hot Wire." And I think "Hot Wire" it's almost better than "Blow My Fuse." And it came out July 9th of '91, so even at that time, Nirvana still hadn't come out. Skid Row was going number one at that time. So, but it was right at the very end. But this album is so good. I mean, I'm just gonna point out like songs that I think are easily up there with the best of "Blow Your Fuse." "Girl Money," phenomenal. "Loveaholic," "Bump the La La," which is obviously gets up there with one of the best titles ever too. And "Same Jane." And then they had a great ballad called "Tear Down the Walls." Alas, the album only goes up to number 64. It did sell 200,000 copies. That's another. We were talking the other day about if some of these albums had come out in like '94. If this thing had come out in '94, it would have died. And in fact, they did have an album come out in '95 that was called "Show Business." That was actually really good, and it died. But "Hot Wire" is right next to "Blow My Fuse" with my favorite Kix albums, and deserves so much better. And it came out in '91, but still the timing just wasn't right.
Yeah, this is another one of those odd ones, and it kind of goes back to one of the ones that you mentioned before, where I remember hearing this. I remember loving "Blow My Fuse," and then this came out, and because I'm not a big AC/DC guy, I think this album, they were really, showing their AC/DC vibe,
yep.
And I remember not digging this album when it came out, and then years later, I think it might even be like not that long ago when I interviewed Brian Forsyth. I went back and I listened to this album, and I really did like it. So it kind of grew on me. And yeah, I remember him telling the story of like, it was dead on arrival. The Nirvana just came out, and even the guy at their label told them they made the wrong album, right after it got finished. So that's got to be like demoralizing. But yeah, I think all those songs you mentioned are great, especially "Tear Down the Walls." Super cool ballad. Might even be better than "Don't Close Your Eyes" in some respects, but just couldn't get the credit.
Well, I'm gonna follow up on, because I think I remember thinking the same thing. I remember hearing this when it first came out and thinking I don't like it, and maybe it was just because everybody said, well, you shouldn't listen to Kix, and so I put it away. But it was a couple of years ago and it was probably a conversation on Twitter where somebody was talking about this album, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go revisit that because I really like "Blow My Fuse." Can it be that bad? And went back and gave it a couple listens, and those songs just started grabbing me, and I thought, damn, for a lot of years I missed out on a great album. And so yeah, deserve better. It sells 200,000 copies, and these days bands would cut off something important to sell 200,000 albums. So I mean, back then it's a failure. Nowadays you'd be happy with that, but man, it's a great album, full of catchy songs. Got a great ballad that could have been a big hit if it had come out earlier. So yeah, Kix "Hot Wire." Go check it out if you haven't.
Okay, number 12. This one is like universally despised by everybody, and I'm gonna fight like hell for it.
Awesome.
Freely's Comet, Second Sighting. This album gets this crapped on, man, all the time. All you ever hear is that, Todd Howarth took over and Ace, sucked on this or whatever it is. But I don't know, man. I love this album. I think I like it now more than I ever have. And I get the first one, Into the Night is great. Rock Soldiers is great. Breakout is cool. I mean, there's some cool moments, but I think overall, I'll challenge anybody. You go through that album and tell me what songs are really superior, on that besides, the singles. Obviously, Ace's 1978 album trumps all, right? That thing is like freaking legendary. It's the greatest album ever made, according to everyone online. But so this is one of those ones where, it just kind of gets bagged on a lot. I don't really get it. Now, neither of these were huge sellers. The debut doesn't appear to be certified. This isn't certified, so they probably sold kind of comparable. But I think what I try to do with this one, Anthony, when I go back, I do remember kind of being like more of an Ace Frehley guy than a Todd Howarth guy, right? I mean, this is Frehley's Comet, so I think maybe I wasn't the biggest fan of him when I was a kid. I think when I go back, though, and I listen to him, I can't discredit this guy's talent. You know what I mean? Sure. It's over now. Fallen Angel. There's a lot of cool songs that he does, and I think the songs that Ace does as well are great. I mean, I challenge anybody to tell me the song Insane isn't a cool song. That was the first single. Right. It's freaking catchy as hell. It's just straight up Ace. It's awesome. And I even like some of the goofy songs like Separate and Juvenile Delinquent and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think I actually like Second Sighting better than the debut Frehley's Comet. That's just me. People are probably booing as they listen to this, but it is what it is, man. I'm a Second Sighting guy.
Okay. And the reason that I laughed is I just read an article from Ultimate Classic Rock talking about how Second Sighting was such a shit show after the debut, and the fact that Howarth took over. I mean, they wanted Ace to be the singer, but I mean, on record, Ace can sound pretty good. When you see him live, you start to realize, like, hey, he might need somebody else to sing some of these songs.
Right.
So I'm not surprised, and I think Todd Howarth is phenomenal. So that's another album that I'm going to need to go revisit. But isn't it strange how when the solo albums came out, I mean, Ace's was the number one seller. I mean, people would have thought that, Ace was going to have a huge career, but, he took so long to release his solo albums, and, so I think that hurt him. But, Second Sighting, that's one that I'm going to need to go check out again.
And another point, you got to think about, as Kiss fans, go back and how many songs did Ace ever really have on a Kiss album, okay? For the longest time, he didn't have any. Then he might have had one, and then once he got big for Dynasty and Unmasked, he might have had three. But, he's not a lead singer. You know what I mean? He's got a cool voice. Right. He's kind of like a character singer. He's not like a great singer. So I think to have him do like a Paul and Gene type of a thing with Todd Howarth makes complete sense. So to think that Ace is going to sing all these songs and write all these songs for somebody who's only contributed a few songs to each album that he's ever done, it's kind of unrealistic, really.
Oh, some of the best Kiss songs are Ace songs. I mean, "Shock Me" is one of my favorite Kiss songs of all time. "Rocket Ride" is phenomenal. Great song. Ace's voice is very limited. Ace isn't going to sing a ballad, and he isn't going to sing a rock song that stretches the boundaries of where the voice can go. It's got to be middle of the road. And when the song is like that, Ace can do it and do it well, but you're limited, so he needs somebody else to pick up the slack. Because in the 80s, you needed some higher songs. You needed the occasional ballad, and just Ace wasn't going to go there.
Nope. All right, buddy. What do you got for 11?
Okay, Britney Fox. Britney Fox, "Bite Down Hard" is my next choice. So their self-titled album in '88 has "Girls' School" on it. It goes to number 39 on Billboard. It goes gold. "Boys in Heat" comes out, and the band starts to fall apart. Dizzy Dean Davidson leaves the band. And I thought Boys in Heat was a solid album. There were some good songs on there.
Love it.
But you'd have thought that Britney Fox was going to die, and instead they get a guy named Tommy Paris comes into the band. And they release an album on March 27th in '91 called "Bite Down Hard." And "Bite Down Hard" might be my favorite release of the three, of at least those first three Britney Fox albums. You know, and it came out before the grunge revolution. It was, like I said, March in '91. They had a phenomenal ballad with "Look My Way." They had a lot of AC/DC influence. You know, Six Guns Loaded, Shot from my gun, Louder was great. They had a cover song, Midnight Moses, that was really good. There is very little filler on this album. Again, I don't think it even got into the top 200 on Billboard, so there's no kind of certification. But Tommy Paris's vocals on that album are just, another level. And I wish that's another one I wish they could have released a couple more albums and seen how they could have grown. But Bite Down Hard, deserved better. And I think Britney Fox, I mean, they had a knack for writing catchy rock songs, and Bite Down Hard had that, but it just it failed as far as sales wise.
I'm with you. I like that album a lot. I'm a big Britney Fox fan. Everybody knows that. So I'll just leave it there. I'm with you. That's a great album.
Yep. What do you got?
Number 11. I'm going with Stryper. In God We Trust. And I think this is probably the most fitting example that we've had out of any of them, because the mammoth To Hell with the Devil, right? It's multiple. I think it's a couple million, or maybe it's just a million. And then this comes out and it just doesn't do as well. You know what I mean? I think this was gold, so probably looked at as a failure sales wise. And there's another thing about this album, and when I talked to Michael Sweet, I asked him, and he actually admitted it. This album is I can't talk. It is a cookie cutter wannabe, for the most part, of To Hell with the Devil. They did want to replicate the success. If you look at it, the first song is the title track. The second song is the single. Then by you get to the fourth song, it's the ballad. You could go right down, and actually, even where the heavier songs are, everything is exactly the same. That being said, I do like it quite a bit. I actually liked it quite a bit when it came out. I think I might like it even more now. The one thing that separates it, so to say it's a complete clone, you can't really do it, because this album has got a lot more of a crisp, clean production. I think this one even might be a little bit more poppier than the album that's before it. And I dig that, man. So I dig the title track, Keep the Fire Burning, World of You and I, and the song Lonely, man, is such a lost track toward the end of the album. It's a power ballad. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of it. I think it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And here's where we talk about, like, when it's sandwiched in between something. Because To Hell with the Devil is a giant success. In God We Trust is kind of like, okay, whatever. And then Against the Law has the distinction of being like, Stryper becomes Bad Boys. You know what I mean?
Right.
And people are in love. Though you want to talk about internet fandom. I mean, that album didn't do shit, but now everybody claims that to be their favorite Stryper album. So if you look at a huge album like To Hell with the Devil, internet legend, Against the Law, and God We Trust has no chance.
Right. I just on my Twitter account, Hair Metal Guru. Just kidding. I post a lot of old, ads from old magazines, but I just came across an ad for the Against the Law album, and there's cigarettes on the table and things that you just would not have seen from an older Stryper album.
Right.
And you're right, that To Hell with the Devil was so huge, but it's not surprising that it is so hard to make it in the music industry. I mean, I've never been in a band, but there are a million bands out there, especially during the 80s.
Yep.
So when you come up with something that works, it doesn't surprise me, that a band comes out with, okay, here's our Us Against the World rock song. Here's the I Miss You ballad. You're gonna follow what works, and so that Michael Sweet and I follow Michael Sweet on Facebook, and the dude seems like such a good guy. So I root for Stryper, but it's easy to see why some of these bands They find a formula that works. They copy it, and unfortunately, the replication doesn't always work sales wise. No. But
All right, buddy. Number 10.
All right. So here's a band that I know we're both gonna agree on, and they never had an album that got what it deserved, and that band is Lillian Axe.
Yeah.
And I know both of us are huge fans. So I'm gonna say for the sake of the internet popularity, Love and War is probably the album that a lot of people online would say deserved better. There were some phenomenal singles. It was out on a major label, MCA, which, Music Cemetery of America, because they fucked that album over.
They did.
Big time. But in January of 92, they come out with an album called Poetic Justice. On IRS Grand Slam Records, and actually I'm going to point, that album was just re-released on vinyl, and it's $19 on Amazon. So Steve Blaze, you owe me for
not bad. Yeah, there we go. There we go.
And actually Psycho Schizophrenia also re-released on vinyl, so I just bought both of them. But that the album probably didn't stand a chance, but they were really hurt, I feel, by releasing a cover of the Badfinger song, No Matter What, as a first single. Now, I really like that cover.
Me too.
I think it's a great song. But I think they had better. True Believer,
Oof.
Which was that released as a single?
It might have been released to radio, but there was no video.
Right. So True Believer, I think, is an amazing single that the band wrote. They had one of my favorite songs on that album is a song called Dying to Live. Mm-hmm. And the lyrics to that, I mean, I get goosebumps right now just thinking about it. And when you hear the note that Ron Taylor hits at the end of that song, I'm just like that song deserves so much better. They had a phenomenal ballad on there called See You Someday. Yep. And so Ron Taylor, bless your heart. When I was in Iraq in 2003, I did an interview on Metal Sludge, and Ron Taylor emailed me, and we chatted a little bit, and so that guy's voice just, it deserved to be heard by millions of people, and that album, deserved more than it got, but. So I don't know if it's as big online as Love and War, and I know Psycho Schizophrenia gets a lot of love, mm-hmm. But Poetic Justice, man, I mean, I just love that band. That band did no wrong for 4 albums, and I love Poetic Justice.
Yeah, what's funny is kind of going back to some similar themes that have happened we've talked about, but I remember being drinking the Kool-Aid with Love and War back in '89. You know what I mean? Like, I just thought Lillian Axe just kept getting better and better, and I couldn't wait to see what the next album was going to be like. And I think when it came out in '92, I got to admit I was slightly disappointed because I don't know, it just wasn't connecting with me at first. And maybe it was a little bit deeper than where I was mentally at that point. I might have been only like 16 years old or so. I don't even know how old I was, but I don't know. The album did not connect with me completely for a while. As I got older and my love for Lillian Axe just kept getting stronger and stronger, I love this album. This album's a masterpiece. It is the perfect album to follow Love and War. All the songs that you mentioned are great. I'm a big fan of the whole thing. So, no, definitely one that does not get enough credit. I may mention another album of theirs that doesn't get enough credit here as we get going. But
okay.
But great, you're right. The not that it's a big seller, but the legendary album on the internet chatter is definitely Love and War, 100%.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And the band is still out there doing it, but they seem to go through singers like crazy. It's unfortunate that Ron Taylor doesn't come back, but I mean, people change, but. Man, I love his voice, and I would love to hear more from him.
Yeah, me too. Great singer. All right, number 10. This one shouldn't really be surprising It's got a lot of mixed feelings. I think a lot of people listen to this album with their eyes instead of their ears. I'm going to go with Ozzy, Ultimate Sin.
Okay.
Ozzy doesn't even like this album. And I think it's much better than Bark at the Moon. I think, once again, this is the one that gets lost in the shuffle because, Bark at the Moon, the song and everything is so huge. Obviously, those first albums with Randy Rhoads have their own legendary status. Zakk Wylde enters into the fold with No Rest for the Wicked. And then, obviously, No More Tears is where Ozzy just became like a commercial juggernaut, you know what I mean? And I think this is an album that completely just gets lost in the shuffle. Ultimate Sin and Shot in the Dark were great singles, but I think the deep tracks kick ass too, man. Like Secret Loser and Lightning Strikes, Thank God for the Bomb, Killer of Giants. And basically when we look at it, it was a slight failure because I think it looks like Bark at the Moon was like a $3 million and then this was a $2 million. You know what I mean? So I feel like even though and let's face it, I got into music in '86, like metal music, and this was the first Ozzy album I ever bought. So it's always going to be. I had the album cover T-shirt. I was in, man. So this is my Ozzy, and I don't really care what anyone else says. So
right,
I'm out. Mic drop.
Right. Oh well, and I was never a huge Ozzy fan until No More Tears, and I still think the guitar sound on that album is just phenomenal. But I'll be honest, since No More Tears, Ozzy has lost me.
Totally.
He seems to be just phoning it in, and he's gonna live off that album and his '80s albums. But everything he's done since then is just, to me, filler. So I need to go revisit that album because it's been a while. I still listen to the Randy albums, and I still listen to No More Tears. So I'm gonna have to revisit that. Good call.
And I forgot to mention, it's got the great guitar work of Jake E. Lee. Badlands.
Who ended up in Badlands.
Hey Fish.
Hey Fish. Badlands. Oh.
Motley 94. That has nothing to do with anything. But okay. All right, man. Let's hear your number 9.
Okay. So I really struggled with this one because, it's Crocus, and the album is Heart Attack.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, that's a lost
So they had Headhunter in 1983 went gold. It went to number 25 on Billboard. They had another album that I think they had 2 gold albums in the 80s. But they start struggling, and sales dwindling. So in 88, March 25th, out comes Heart Attack, and I feel like it is an album where they were just trying to write hits. Like they were saying, okay, here's a formula. We're going to have AC/DC-ish guitar, and we're going to have, here's some song titles. Everybody Rocks, Rock and Roll Tonight, Axe Attack, Wild Love. And so I feel like they were trying to fit a formula, but it was a formula that was super catchy. It's really AC/DC flavored, but hey, I mean, I know you're not a huge AC/DC fan, but I love AC/DC. I think Storace, Mark Storace, I think I'm pronouncing that right, has a great voice. And in fact, probably a lot of people know that he was considered for the AC/DC job after Bon Scott died. And I don't know if he was offered it and turned it down because of Crocus, which if you did that, Mark, man, you fucked up.
You're dipshit.
But so Crocus had some success in the 80s, not huge. A couple albums go gold, and Heart Attack, it made it up to 87 on Billboard, but it's catchy. It may have followed a formula, but that formula sounds great, and you should, if you haven't checked that album out, give it a shot.
It's weird. I remember kind of liking that album toward, it was because that was like 88, right? That album.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember liking it. I remember the look got better. They tried to look like everybody else. Like the singer had a little bit long, instead of that weird fro, he had like longer hair. Yep. You know what I mean? So yeah, they were swinging for the fences. They were trying.
Wasn't it like Loverboy, Helix, Crocus? These really good rock bands, but they had shorter hair, yes. and they really struggled with that as the 80s moved on, and suddenly you could not have short hair and be a rock star.
That was not cool. All right, man. Number 9, I've got Loudness. What album could I possibly put? What do you think it is? Loudness.
Well, it can't be the what is that? Thunder. What's the Thunder album called?
Oh, Thunder in the East is their biggest one, obviously.
That's the biggest one, so it can't be that one. It's got a Soldier of Fortune.
You know, I wanted to do Soldier of Fortune. I've talked about Soldier of Fortune until I've been blue in the face. So I tried to avoid Soldier of Fortune.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about Lightning Strikes.
Okay.
I love this album. I love Lightning Strikes. And this is another one of those growers where, like, over time, it just, like, I keep listening to it, and I'm finding all these little interesting, guitar parts, and the whole band just kicks ass. And I think you nailed it. You're like, it can't be Thunder in the East. So obviously, in America, for us Americans, if we think about Loudness, that's the first thing that comes to mind is the Thunder in the East. Hurricane Eyes was a real dud, and I definitely don't care for that album. At least Soldier of Fortune has the distinction of that, they brought in the American singer, they brought in Mike Vicera. But I do think Lightning Strikes just kind of gets swept under the rug, and it just doesn't get talked about enough. I actually probably like Lightning Strikes better than Thunder in the East. I think they were really growing as musicians. I even dig Let It Go. Like, I know they're trying real hard to be like as American as possible, but it's a cool song. Dark Desire, Ashes in the Sky. Then they do. There's one song, Who Knows. It's got a lot of Iron Maiden-ish type, riffing and the bass and the drums all kind of doing like a Maiden thing. Street Life Dream, and then there's the last song is Complication. A lot of weird timing and stuff, but I'm just always impressed by the musicianship of Loudness between the drummer, the bass player, and Akira on guitar. Now the singer, it fits. It's kind of like, he's got that charm, it's Loudness when he's singing. But I think it's the other musicians that carry Loudness, and I think they're just firing on all cylinders, very creative, weird timing, and it's just an album that doesn't get talked about enough. So Lightning Strikes, that's what I got.
Yeah, Thunder in the East is probably the only album that I really know well. The other day I did listen to Soldier of Fortune after we had chatted about them on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that. So I'm gonna need to go listen to this one because honestly I couldn't even tell you one song on that album, but that's that's an interesting choice. So I'm really because I was just trying to think, do I know a song on that? And I don't.
You probably don't.
So I'm gonna have to go check it out.
You got to check it out. That's why we do this.
That's why we're doing this.
Number 8.
Okay, so there's a lot of bands in the 80s that started off big and they declined with each record, and this band's maybe the epitome of that. And I'm talking about Rat.
Yeah.
So the first album, Out of the Cellar, goes triple platinum. Then there's Invasion of Your Privacy, I think went double platinum. And then I think the next 2 went platinum. So you get to 1990's Detonator. And you can tell that the band is desperate. They're like, man, we keep losing sales. We got to try something new, because they brought in the guy to turn around an album, Desmond Child, as a co-songwriter. They did that. They brought in Diane Warren of Aerosmith, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, and all these huge ballads. And I just wonder, I want to hear the first time like Diane Warren listened to Stephen Pearcy's voice and thought, what the fuck? How am I going to write something for this guy? But they succeeded because the song Giving Yourself Away is a phenomenal ballad. It should have been a hit. And they also had some rock songs that I think, really held up versus some of their earlier stuff. Much poppier, One Step Away, a very pop rock song. Heads I win, tails you lose, and I think Loving You's a Dirty Job and Shame, Shame, Shame were singles along with Giving Yourself Away. But, you know, I don't, the album does not measure up to Invasion or the debut, but there is some great catchy rock songs. There's a great rock ballad, and the album came out in 1990. So, you know, I mean, Poison had Flesh and Blood that year. Warrant had Cherry Pie. So it's not like, I mean, the timing was right, but it just, you know, I'm sure now I'm going to, Robin Crosby, you know, was falling into his heroin addiction. Yep. I think he was really struggling. And I'm a huge Rat fan, but if you ever watch videos of Rat or Stephen Pearcy live, to be honest, Stephen Pearcy's voice is shit live, but on record it sounds cool as hell. So I think that might have had something to do with their, you know, popularity declining. Is, you know, Rat wasn't a band who was going to go out and sound like the record, but Detonator, some great songs, you know, could have been much bigger. I think it did go gold, but, you know, at that time they'd had 4 platinum albums, so, you know, it didn't live up to, you know, what it should have.
You know, a lot of thoughts crossed through my mind as you were talking about this album. I enjoy this album. I don't, like I said, don't think it's their greatest by any means, but I think it's got some good stuff on it, and they were definitely trying. And you made up a great point, like, why was this not big, but Flesh and Blood and Cherry Pie were? And then I was starting to think, well, did people just look at as Rat as kind of like old hat or old timers? But then Motley Crue, just the year before, came out about the same time as Rat and have a huge album. So, you just don't know. For some reason, just people didn't connect with it. But I totally dig that later era of the 80s and early 90s when you look at Reach for the Sky and Detonator. I think those are super cool albums. I may mention one of them myself here shortly. Okay, so
I feel bad for bashing on Steven's voice. I mean, Steven, he's that guy's a rocker through and through. He's still releasing albums. Yep. He's still touring, and his voice live was much better back in the day. But, you know, I mean, give the guy props for, man, he's still out doing it, and so I salute him.
Definitely. All right, number 8. I got to mention my boys, Judas Priest, and I'm going to go with Ram It Down, man. I was hoping it was going to be Ram It Down. And I think if you look back, this is another one of those ones that are sandwiched in between some interesting albums. You know, Turbo. A lot of people have mixed emotions on it, but it was a big seller. It sold 1 million copies. And then if you look at Painkiller, I don't know what Painkiller sold. I don't think I looked at that one, but it probably only went gold if I had to take a guess. But it's got the distinction of being one of their best albums ever, heaviest albums ever. So Ram It Down kind of doesn't have a chance. You know what I mean? You and I talked about this on Twitter. It was Johnny Be Good, and a lot of people cannot stand Johnny Be Good. It's probably a horrible choice for a single. I like it. I know you like it too. But I think we set the tone off kind of weird when we start the release with that out. You know, the videos with that song, because there's so many other great songs. I mean, Ram It Down's a great fast rocker, heavy metal. I'm a rocker. Hard as Iron. I mean, let's not forget A Blood Red Skies. I mean, I just dig the whole friggin' thing, man. I really do love this album. Weird thing about this album. It wasn't promoted properly. I mean, to have one single, I don't know what the hell, you know what I mean? That was kind of unheard of in '88. So why big band like Judas Priest giving them one single? And a lot of this was leftover stuff from Turbo. Turbo was supposed to be a double album. It was supposed to be called Twin Turbos or something like that. And there was going to be a more popular album and then a more harder album as part of a double album. And that got scrapped. So a lot of the stuff was kind of hanging around. But this one is kind of, it gets kind of sandwiched between two pretty interesting albums in Priest's catalog. So it just doesn't get enough love. If you haven't heard it in a while, go back, because I really dig all these songs. Like I said, I can listen to the whole thing all the way through, no problem. I am kind of a Priest guy, so that's probably why I like it no matter what. But I dig it. I dig this album.
Ram It Down is one of those that I know I bought from BMG again, and I remember my mom, because I had to have her, you know, I was a teenager, and so she had to sign off on me and she saw the name Judas Priest, and she thought I was getting into devil's music, which I think is just hilarious now. But I still love their cover of Johnny Be Good. I hate when bands just try to copy the song exactly. That does nothing for me.
Yep.
But they made that song their own, and Halford's vocals on it are the guitar riff, and you know, it was the soundtrack for a movie called Johnny Be Good with Anthony Michael Hall. And, you know, I think that movie kind of bombed. I liked it as a teenage kid. I thought it was hilarious. But, yeah, that album deserved better. And you know, a lot more, if I'm right, a lot less keyboards, a lot more heavy guitar than the previous album. Am I right on that?
Yeah, way heavier album than Turbo. But you know, another thing too is I just think like Halford's voice. This is where his voice is in prime form. Not that he still doesn't sound great today, but I think that late '80s he was just, a lot of the singers were really shining in the late '80s, and he was one of them. So
absolutely.
All right, man. What do you got for 7?
Okay, I'm gonna go with the band Helix. So good old Canadian metal. They had they're kind of comparable to Crocus. They had a couple albums in the early 80s. They had one called Walking the Razor's Edge that almost went gold. It had, you know, maybe their biggest song called Rock You, sold 400,000 copies. But I'm going to talk about the album Wild in the Streets. It came out in 1987, and here's another, you know, one of those bands that didn't look like the typical 80s hair metal glam band, and they kind of struggled to fit in as the 80s went on. But this album had some huge songs, and Wild in the Streets, Never Gonna Stop the Rock, What You Bringin' to the Party, and High Voltage Kicks, all AC/DC tinged hard rock that I think is great. And then they had a really surprising ballad. They covered the Nazareth song Dream On, and they do a phenomenal, and probably part of the reason I really loved it is because I had never heard the Nazareth version. So when I heard this, I thought it was a Helix song, but it's a great cover, and you know, I think the album went gold in Canada, but to go gold in Canada, if your mom and your sister buy it, it goes gold. So it didn't do anything in America. I think it went to 179 on Billboard, but you know, super catchy album, and great ballad that could have been a hit. You know, didn't do anything, but yeah, Helix, Wild in the Streets.
Yeah, that's a band I never got into. I had no knowledge of this album. I mean, I think there is like one big Helix song that everybody knows, but I can't for the life of me think of what it is. Do you know what it is?
Did it Rock You? Give me an R.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
I think that's the big song.
That's got to be it. Yeah, that is what it is. So, yeah, never been a big fan, so I guess I'll just stay quiet, and maybe I'll have to go back and check out some of the stuff.
You have to go check it out, man.
Definitely. All right, number 7, this is where My Lillian Axe pops up, but it's not going to be the one you mentioned, and it's not going to be Love and War, because we've already set the ground rules that's probably their, you know, biggest, not that they have a big album, but that's their most legendary one. But I'm going to go with the self-titled debut album. I think this album is so underrated. You know, honestly, I don't care what anybody says. I think this is an easier listen than probably Love and War. I think Love and War is great, shows a lot of depth, and they go in a lot of weird places. But the debut is more consistent. It just kind of hovers in that same kind of a lane. The only song that gets kind of epic on this one is probably Waiting in the Dark. But the rest of it is all just straightforward rock stuff. And, you know, what can I say? Misery Loves Company. Inside,
I love that song.
Yeah, Inside Out. And, of course, the ballad. Nobody knows. How that wasn't a big single, I don't know. But like I said, I won't talk too much about these guys because I feel like I've said so much about them. But I love this album. And like I said, I love the first 4. What can I say? I could say it's a go-to, but I kind of go to all of them. But I do think the debut is not appreciated enough. And you mentioned Poetic Justice. I don't think that's appreciated enough. I do think Love and War kind of gets all the attention. But if you haven't listened to the debut in a long time, go back, check it out.
I dropped $100 probably 6 months ago, buying that, the self-titled debut and Love and War on vinyl.
Nice.
On eBay, and I probably got 3 copies each of the CD. I mean, I just that band deserves so much better. And hey, there's a Rat connection with that album because produced by Robin Crosby.
For sure. All right.
Yep.
Number 6.
Okay, well, you brought up one of the biggest bands of the 80s with Bon Jovi. Well, I'm going to bring up the other biggest band of the 80s, and that's Def Leppard.
Yeah.
And, you know, Pyromania and Hysteria both go 10 times platinum, and I still love Pyromania. Hysteria has not aged well, but I'm going to talk about High and Dry from 1981. And, you know, it's been certified 2 times platinum, but I think a lot of that is just because when Pyromania blew up, everybody went back and said, hey, let's check out this other album. And, you know, it was High and Dry was also produced by Mutt Lange, who did Pyromania and Hysteria. It did, you know, originally it went to number 38 on Billboard, but some of their best songs, Bringing On the Heartbreak, which, you know, and actually ended up getting re-released once Pyromania started getting huge, because I think everyone knew that was, you know, just a phenomenal song. Let It Go, another Hit and Run, and what was the other one that I was? Oh, there's so many great songs. So I think Let It Go, which is the opener, that's the song where Joe finally, you know, he found his upper register, and you know, that dropped the panties back in the 80s, and I'm talking about my panties that were the ones dropping, because that is a phenomenal album, and to me, I easily like it better than Hysteria, and it's right up there with Pyromania.
Nice. I'm never, I profess this a lot of times, not a huge Def Leppard guy, but I do like a lot of the songs that you mentioned. I know those songs, and yeah, definitely. I mean, but you can't escape those giant shadows of Pyromania and Hysteria. So High and Dry, probably the debut as well. They're just albums that totally get lost in the shuffle.
Right, exactly. Yep. What do you got next?
Right. Oh, Rat. We talked about Rat.
Oh.
And they're coming up again. It's the album before the one that you mentioned, Detonator, and it's Reach for the Sky. I love this album. I just always have. I feel like a broken record on some of these, because I feel like I've talked about them before, but you know, don't bite the hand.
Man, you're bringing a new spin.
Yeah, there we go. So, you know, obviously there's some good singles. I Want a Woman and Way Cool Jr. are pretty cool, but I think it's the deeper tracks for me that really get me. You know, Don't Bite the Hand That Feeds You, What's It Gonna Be, What I'm After. I think that's the last song. And for some reason, like, I was on this kick a few months ago where I would only listen to like the last 3 songs on this album, because I had like, because usually, you know the deal, man. All these 80s albums are filled up with the real good stuff in the beginning, and then the fillers kind of like toward the end, you know. But I think with this album, I really dig the songs that end this album. And, you know, this was, as you had mentioned, with Detonator, that might have been a gold. This was only a million. I feel like like Dokken and Rat and all these guys, they could have put out the biggest piece of crap, and at least it would still go a million. You know, they'd always at least get the million.
Right.
So that just shows you how big this genre and this movement was. But yeah, I think Reach for the Sky totally gets forgotten. It's all you ever hear about is Out of the Cellar and Invasion of Your Privacy. But yeah, I think this one and Detonator are cool albums. It's a cool era. Should be talked about more.
I'm going to be honest. I do not like Way Cool Jr. That intro and those, like, I don't know, is there horns in it or something?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
That just loses me. But I love the song I Want a Woman. And you know, I think that, you know, that title is so 1980s, and now I'm like, oh, but it's so catchy. But you know, I just got last week that the new Wrapped vinyl box set, and I don't even really listen to vinyl. I mainly listen online, but I'm a collector, so I like to buy shit like that just to have. So I just got that. There's some cool extras in it. and it makes me want to go back, and so I need to check out some of those deep tracks that you're talking about, because that's Rat is, to me, that's just a cool band. I mean, those guys and Motley Crue, I mean, they're, and even Quiet Riot, shoot, they're the guys that started this genre, in my opinion, and so I like to support those bands.
Number 5.
Okay, well, this is a band that has been around for a super long time, way before they got famous, and it's Twisted Sister. So in 1984, they put out Stay Hungry. It goes to number 15, triple platinum, a couple of huge singles. And to me, Twisted Sister and Quiet Riot, their paths really seem kind of intertwined. Yep. They both kind of languished in obscurity for a long time. They both have this huge album that, not that they were, cheesy, but, We're Not Gonna Take It was obviously just a teenage-driven song, and Come On, Feel the Noise, and I love both of those songs, but the albums right afterwards really dropped off, maybe got close to platinum, and then both bands just kind of disappeared. They seem to follow the same track, but the album I'm going to talk about is You Can't Stop Rock and Roll, and it's before Stay Hungry. It did go gold, but I feel like it kind of like High and Dry, that once Stay Hungry got big, people said, hey, let's go check out this album before it. But the kids are back. I'm Me, and the title track, You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. Man, to me, those those songs are better than We're Not Gonna Take It or I Wanna Rock. There is, I don't know if there's a ballad on there or not. So Stay Hungry had The Price, which I do think is a great ballad. But man, Dee Snider's just a force of nature. The band was hungry. They still hadn't made it yet. This album goes, like I said, goes to number 130, goes gold. They're going to blow up the next year with Stay Hungry, but some of their best songs are on You Can't Stop Rock and Roll.
I haven't listened to this album in a long time, but I always liked all their albums. Under the Blade, this. Come Out and Play is kind of cheesy, but there's a couple good ones. I almost thought you were going to say Love Is for Suckers. I really thought you were going to do Love Is for Suckers. Okay. And that's another one where I think it starts off real strong. Kind of like we're talking about with some albums. They packed everything really good in the beginning, and then it goes to total shit. But cool, man. I'm glad that you mentioned You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. Nice.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Here's one I always love to talk about. Scorpions, Savage Amusement. This is an album that totally gets lost in the shuffle. A lot of people aren't fans of it. Once again, I think they're looking with their eyes, everything, or at least the way the album comes across with like the blue and the pink, and then maybe the way they tried to dress on this album. Obviously, when you're sandwiched between Love at First Sting, which is a mammoth album, and ultimately Crazy World became a mammoth album with Wind of Change. So, to me, I'd listen to this album all day before I touch either of those two. That's how strong. That's how passionate I am about it. I love this album. Don't Stop at the Top, Media Overkill, Passion Rules the Game, Believe in Love's a great ballad. I think this one is one of those. A lot of these, it's like a 3-to-1 ratio. So Love at First Sting, it goes 3 million. This goes 1 million. So one thing I haven't mentioned about some of these things, probably what it needed was a super cool lead off track that was something like Rock You Like a Hurricane, and they didn't have it. They just didn't have it. But I love this album, and I definitely think it smokes Crazy World. Not a big fan of Crazy World, so I think this is kind of the last album for Scorpions' run that kind of feels like the old stuff that goes. I feel like you go Love Drive to Here for for the late 70s and 80s, and it has a kind of a vibe, and then the vibe's all over the place. Let's face it. After Crazy World, it's kind of all over the place. So Savage Amusement, man, I'm a big fan.
I just listened to this album not long ago, and part of the reason that I read an article about it, and I remember in the article they talked about how the record company wanted Scorpions to make their Hysteria, referring to death.
Yep.
And so, I heard it, they recording took a long time. But yeah, I mean, there's some huge singles. When you said it only went platinum, I'm surprised. I would have thought it had gone double platinum because their Passion Rules the Game. What is Rhythm of Love? Was that on there?
That was the first single. Yep.
Rhythm of Love. But yeah, maybe they were missing that Pour Some Sugar on Me or something that was just huge. But yeah, that's a really solid album. And yeah, that's a good choice.
You know what's weird when you think about it is that like we talk about these albums came out the same year, so Judas Priest gets one single and Scorpions gets 3. You know, it's just kind of funny that
right.
Like why? You know what I mean? Well, somebody was being cheap over at Columbia Records, I guess.
Right.
All right.
There's a lot of record companies and talking about Lillian Axe and MCA that just seem not to know shit and man, some of the decisions that they made just make my head spin.
All right, what's your 4?
Okay, Saigon Kick.
Ooh,
and so they go big in 1992 with The Lizard. It goes gold. They have the huge ballad "Love Is on the Way," which maybe was unfortunate, but I'm going to talk about the debut album. Yeah. Came out in 1991. This is a phenomenal record. I was a freshman in college in 1991, and my roommate was a guitar player, and it actually worked out really well because he introduced me to bands like Saigon Kick, Love Hate, and other bands like that. But they made their fame with Love Is on the Way. There was so much more than that. The debut there's a song on there called My Life that is super Beatles influenced. Yep. And it actually has a kazoo solo, and you can't fucking go wrong with a kazoo solo. They had some punk influence, and I'm a big punk fan. The song called Acid Rain. What You Say and Love of God are just tremendous rock songs. They were very experimental and very ahead of their time, I feel, but not in a way that they were so experimental that they would lose you. It was still rock, but just in a new way. They're not really a hair metal band. I'm sure they would not want to be, lumped in with that scene. But this album, it from what I found, it sold 100,000 copies. I think it's much better than The Lizard, which went gold. And I'll just throw out there that their third album, Water, was really good.
Yeah,
they lost their lead singer, Jason Byler, the songwriter and guitar player. He ended up singing on Water, but they don't lose anything. You can't even really tell. But with that album, they released a ballad as their first single, and I think people were like, "Oh, you're just a ballad band," and they weren't. But they're known for ballads, but a great rock band, and to me, their best album is their debut.
Yeah, I remember me and my friends just kind of being blown away by this album because I think when this came out, we were kind of wanting some more interesting stuff, and they were giving it to us. You know what I mean? Like I said, there was elements, like you said, of Beatles. I think there were some similarities to Jane's Addiction.
Yes.
All the the metal stuff was there. Maybe they even they were kind of in the vein of King's X in a lot of ways too, just kind of like that.
Yep.
Oddball metal, and just great stuff.
That Jane's Addiction comparison, I think, is really fits because I've heard other people say, Jane's ahead of their time.
Yep.
So was this band.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So definitely didn't fit into the hair metal scene, and then somehow they got grouped into the hair metal scene when they did Love Is on the Way. So
right.
It is what it is. But they were way ahead of their time and were doing some cool
Sometimes those big hits and extreme can probably relate with more than words. Sometimes those big hits can be like a noose around your neck and come back to haunt you in a way.
Big time. All right, here's where for number 4, I'm going to mention Britney Fox, but I'm not going to mention the one that you mentioned. Going to mention Boys in Heat because this is one of those ones where I'm going to go back to this thing I keep saying where it's kind of sandwiched in between some heavy hitters because the debut was a big album. That went gold, and I think everybody just figured that Britney was going to become a platinum band. And I think they might have been able to because I think this album is great. I think this album has the goods. It's just that the band fell apart before you really could get there. You only had 2 singles. I'm a big fan. I've mentioned this, I feel like 800 times. I want to mention it again. Big fan of the song Angel in My Heart. I think that would have been a great single. I also think Long Road would have been a great single to end it all off. And those things didn't happen, I don't think Standing in the Shadows was a really good song to win people over. That's just me. It felt a little bit like a Long Way to Love wannabe. So I think that there was better stuff on there. But, some people say that album's too long. But I can listen to the whole thing and enjoy it. I don't know. That's just me. And I think it just has that designation of, like I said, it had no certification. And then after, I think the Tommy Paris album, Bite Down Hard, is a thing of legend now. Nobody gave a rat's ass about that album in 1991. Nope. But now it is legendary in its status. A lot of people are a big fan of what he did in the band. And just look as that album as a great album, and it is. But so I think between the debut being a bigger commercial success and just the coolness of Bite Down Hard, and Boys in Heat has a really shitty album cover, so that doesn't help. But it's just it gets lost in the shuffle. But for me, it's actually my favorite Britney Fox album. So
I love that album, and I love that band. I mean, I think the debut, a lot of those deep cuts are great. Boys in Heat had a ton of songs that weren't released as singles that I thought were awesome. And I think Dream On was released as a single, but I love that song. But Stevie, Angel in My Heart. Yeah. I mean, that album is full of great songs, and Stevie Rochelle, talks in his Metal Sludge Diaries about how they were getting ready to go on tour with Britney Fox for the Boys in Heat album, and how Dean Davidson and I think Michael Kelly Smith got into a fight.
Yep.
And the band broke up, and that fucked the tour, and it really screwed over Tough, and because their debut album, What Comes Around Goes Around, which I think is a very good album. And they were, that was going to be the tour that, they were going to get on, and with a semi-decent big band. And it screwed Britney Fox, and it screwed Tough, and it's important because that's a great album.
All right, we're getting down to the wire, man. Number 3.
So the next band I'm going to talk about went huge in 1989 with an album called Once Bitten, Twice Shy.
Ooh, yeah.
And that's Great White. They went to number 9, sold 2 million copies. The album prior to that also went platinum, the album Once Bitten. But in 1984, they put out a self-titled album.
On your knees, down on your knees, down on your knees, down on your knees.
It only went to a number 144 on Billboard. But to me, this is the sound that Great White should have stuck with. It was straight-ahead rock. The song Stick It, Down on Your Knees. They do this amazing cover of The Who's Substitute, but, obviously Twice Shy went double platinum, so I don't know shit. But I'm not big. If you've listened to my videos on YouTube, I'm not big when these hard rock bands try to go bluesy. And though I do like Once Bitten, Twice Shy, I do like, that era of Great White, but those earlier years, they were a lot heavier on guitar. Jack's vocals were a lot rougher, and that's my favorite era of the band, and so that's an album that I think deserved better. Maybe if it had done better, they would have stuck with that sound. Obviously, they found something else that works, but Great White, self-titled, great album.
Yeah, I prefer Great White as like a metal band too, and I think the debut stuff that you mentioned is great. I don't mind Once Bitten because I feel like it still has some of that metal, and we're just putting a little bit of the blues in. And then right after this album is like I'm really set with Great White. Like I don't care for Twice Shy or anything that follows because I think it just goes so far into the blues area that I'm not feeling it. So no, I'm with you. I think they were better as a straight up metal band.
And I've read some interviews with Mark Kendall. I mean that he prefers that blues, and it was successful. But that's I like that more metal sound that they did, and they did it really well.
Agree 100%. All right, number 3, I'm going to go with Wasp, and I'm going to go with The Last Command. I feel like this is another one where the debut just gets all the credit. People just are so obsessed with the freaking debut. I like the debut too, but I think it's like blown out of proportion. And another album I think that's completely blown out of proportion, at least in my opinion, is the Crimson Idol. It's like people are just obsessed with the Crimson Idol. I just never got it. I never got into Crimson Idol. Wasp kind of ends for me in a lot of ways with the Headless Children, and they really end, frankly, as a band, because it's really never really been a band that much after the Headless Children. So, but I do think Last Command gets kind of crapped on. It's definitely a little bit more. Oh, what's the way to say it? Like maybe a little more poppier or a little bit more hokier than the debut. It's not as dangerous, but I think the songwriting's there. You know, I mean, obviously Wild Child, everybody's cool with that song. You hear a lot about that.
Yep.
But some of the other tracks you just don't hear anything about. And I think the whole damn thing's great. Jack Action, Cries in the Night, the title track, Fistful of Diamonds. It's just a fun album. It's a good listen. I don't think it sold that much different. It probably sold less, but they're both certified at 1 million. So, but I think, you know, as we talked about, the internet chatter, the legendary status, the debut is definitely always going to overshadow The Last Command. But I think The Last Command is great.
Well, and the debut, I didn't like how, and Chris Holmes has talked about this on the first album. It seems like they're a band. You know, the whole band's on the cover, and then suddenly it's the Blackie show. And I know Blackie's. You know, he's the alpha male that in the band. He's the songwriter. He makes all the decisions. But I like when a band is a band. So I thought Bon Jovi did it right, even though, you know, Bon Jovi was, you know, the star and he was, you know, the person signed to the record label and everyone else was basically hired. I never knew that back in the 80s because you felt like Bon Jovi. I mean, everybody seemed to be, even though John was a star, everybody seemed to be equally represented. But Wasp, I mean, it really became, you know, he was the focus of the album covers and the focus of the band, and yeah, so that's, I mean, but I do like that album, but you're right, everything was gonna fail in comparison to the debut album.
Definitely. All right, buddy. Number 2.
Okay, so I'm not the biggest fan in the world of this band, but there's a couple reasons that I chose White Lion. And Pride, obviously, you know, goes double platinum. They have, you know, a song. Not a lot of metal bands had #1 songs. You know, Poison had Every Rose. White Lion had When the Children Cry. You know, I think Sweet Child of Mine, did that go to #1? But, you know, a lot of these bands had biggest hits, but it was rare to go #1. So they have this huge album. But the album I'm going to talk about is their third album, Main Attraction.
Yeah.
Went to number 61 on Billboard. It was released in 1991 in April. So, you know, back then you still thought it might have had a chance to do something. So I'll be honest, there's some shit on this album. There are some songs that I do not like at all. But they had the first single, Love Don't Come Easy. It's a mid-tempo kind of acoustic. It's not a ballad, but it's close. Super song. They had 3 ballads that I think are as good as a lot of ballads that bands like that released. You're All I Need, Till Death Do Us Part, and Farewell to You. So my brother's wedding song was Till Death Do Us Part, and I always tell him that, hey, when you get divorced, Farewell to You can be your divorce song. Just kidding, you know. So they're still together, but there was a really good rock song. What the hell was that called? Out with the Boys. They had some great ballads, a really cool mid-tempo with Love Don't Come Easy. But that album died. You know, it made it to number 61 on Billboard. Never got certified, and that was the end of the band. They broke up after that.
Yeah, I love Main Attraction. I think it's their best album for me. And I really, a couple tracks that you didn't mention that I actually really like. I dig some of those like epic long tracks like War Song and Lights and Thunder. Like I feel like that was them kind of stepping out and experimenting a little bit. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then they still came back, like you said, and did Love Don't Come Easy. That felt like regular White Lion. And then from like they redid Broken Heart from their very first album, Fight to Survive, which I love. So there's so many cool moments on that, and the sound quality. Let's talk about that. You get to the early '90s, and the sound quality of the material is just so good at that point. It was peaking. So that's a great sounding album.
Yeah, and Mike Tramp, has such a phenomenal voice, and Vito Bratta. I mean, I'm not a musician, but even I know that Vito Bratta is a phenomenal guitar player.
Yep.
So that's a band that I wish could have done better and could have given us a couple more albums, but it wasn't meant to be.
All right, my number 2 is going to be Europe.
Rock me till I hit that door. Rock me till I take no more.
Out of This World. Obviously, to follow the Final Countdown probably is going to be a tough feat. You know what I mean? We had some big singles, the title track, Rock the Night, and Carrie and Cherokee and all that good stuff. But I think for me, I like this album overall a lot better than the Final Countdown, because I think song for song, it stacks up better. Kind of like with the Scorpions, I just don't think we have that epic song that we need, like we had with the Final Countdown. But Superstitious is cool. Ready or Not, Sign of the Times, Open Your Heart, Let the Good Times Rock. I mean, I could probably just rattle off every song. I think Joey's voice is really peaking here too, especially when you listen to that last song, Tomorrow. It's just him and piano, and his voice is just, man, I don't know, a lot of emotion, a lot of range, a lot of stuff happening. And I'm a big Key Marcello fan. I hate to say this because I probably would want to talk to John Norum at some point, but I like Key Marcello better than John Norum. I dig that melodic shit that he does on Prisoners in Paradise and on this album. So I think just to follow, hey, once again, I got to do it. It's a theme, 3-1, man. Final Countdown was 3 million. This was a 1 million. So still successful, but not that mega hit like they had before.
Yeah, and talk about another, a song that could be a blessing when it came out, but the Final Countdown, I mean, you cannot talk about the band Europe without talking about that song. So I'm sure it's not like they regret it, but they got so pigeonholed into, okay, when's the next Final Countdown, that they had some great songs afterwards, but it wasn't going to have that big poppy keyboard intro, which is what everybody was waiting for, and that's unfortunate because that's another super talented band, and Joey Tempest has a great voice. So that's I think that hit kind of became an issue with their later albums.
All right, the last one, what you got?
Okay, I'm a huge Kiss fan. I think most people know that. I have so much Kiss memorabilia in my house. I mean, Gene Simmons really fucking owes me some royalties. So, but I'm going to talk about Revenge. And Revenge is probably my favorite non-makeup album, and it's probably in my top 3 Kiss albums of all time. Comes out in 1992. Debuts at number 6, and I think they were smart. They released a Gene song instead of a Paul song as the first single. And it was a fucking banger in Unholy. That is a great song. But, it had to be the times. Revenge only goes gold. Doesn't, Crazy Nights went platinum. Most of their 80s albums, even though they weren't on the level of their 70s stuff, most of their stuff went platinum. Most albums had at least one, hit single, but I don't think Revenge did. But check it. I mean, the singles, they had God Gave Rock and Roll to You, which was on the Bill and Ted soundtrack, Unholy, and Domino, which a lot of people hate the song Domino. I love Domino. I love the video. It's Gene Simmons at his best.
Yeah. He's
driving around LA, drinking a Coke, eating fast food. It's at night and he's wearing sunglasses. That's his Gene. It's the epitome of Gene Simmons. There's a song on there called I Just Wanna. That's a Paul song that I think if it comes out 2 years earlier, it's another Heaven's on Fire. It's massive. It's got one of the coolest choruses in a long time. And then there was a really cool, quiet ballad called "Every Time I Look at You." The album released a bunch of singles, but they just didn't seem to hit. And this is, to me, this is the last time. This was the best Gene Simmons period. He had the hair all pulled back. He had the goatee. He finally looked like he was comfortable, in the 80s, wearing all that pink shit. Like he said, he felt like he was dressed in a tutu.
Yep.
So Revenge era, one of my favorite. Kiss eras, it's the best Gene era. There was some songs that should have been massive, and we say it all the time, just right album, wrong time.
Yeah, I mean, geez, we got another hour. I could talk about Revenge all night, but it's just, I mean, Kiss got it right. I think it was really a good time for the fans. That's why I've always looked at it. So if you were a Kiss fan, you finally were like looking at him and like you were proud, especially if I've always been a Gene fan. Gene's always been my favorite guy. So now Gene's out in the forefront, and he's like you said, he's on a couple singles. He looks cool again. He looks like a badass. You could tell he's engaged with the band, and I think that's when Kiss is its most successful, is when when everybody's in the zone and putting their best foot forward. So yeah, it's a great time to be a Kiss fan. Doesn't get overlooked, of course. It didn't have a big single. It wasn't a million seller. A few years later, Kiss gets back together and does some things that just blow away the whole 80s Kiss, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's just, it's one of those kind of lost period in some respects, but in other respects, it has gotten that legendary status in a lot of ways.
You're right. Online it does.
It does. Online
does.
It has that little bit of that legend thing. And and it deserves it because it's a great album. It sounds great and it looks cool. And even though it ain't 70s Kiss, it's at least got the spirit of 70s Kiss. So.
It does. It does. Yep.
All right. Well, as you probably remember, the other night on Twitter, I was promoting an album and I got a lot of pushback on it. So I thought number one was the great spot to put it. It probably fits the bill the greatest out of probably any of these albums we talked about, and it's Whitesnake, Slip of the Tongue. And this album, man, I posted this, and I was getting shit all over. People were shitting on me, they were shitting on this album, and I don't get it. And I'm going to try to, keep it brief, but I'll throw a couple points out there. The big villain of this album is Steve Vai. So Steve Vai ruined Whitesnake because he didn't play the blues, right? That's the story that everybody's telling you. But let's be real, okay? So the Whitesnake self-titled of 87 sells 8 million. This only sells 1 million. Okay, so that's a big drop-off. But let's ask ourselves the most important question is who wrote these songs? There is not a single songwriting credit owed to Steve Vai. This is all David Coverdale and Adrian Vandenberg. I thought they wrote a great album. It's a great hard rock record. But this has been kind of coming up with the past couple that we talked about. They don't have the big. There's no here I go again. I think that's the bottom line. There is no Here I Go Again, and I think they tried with a couple of these tracks. Now You're Gone. It's kind of that mid-tempo, almost a ballad, and then you got deeper, the deeper the love. And I don't know, maybe because I'm so burnt out with the 1987 album because it was just so overplayed. I mean, it's a great album. I probably, if you put a gun to my head, I probably would say the 87 one is better than Slip of the Tongue. But I don't know, something about that year, that album, that sound. I'm a big fan of it, and I will always say that it is. A lot of people I talk to really dig this and the 87 album. They don't give a shit about anything that came out before it or after it, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, so like I said, you can't blame Vai. He didn't write the songs. Maybe they just didn't connect with the average music fan, but I think with metal fans and rock fans, this album fares pretty well. Judgment Day, Wings of the Storm. They pulled another one of their old tricks and redid an old song with "Fool for Your Lovin'." Some really interesting stuff, and I think at the end of the day, I think I'm just kind of a weirdo. Like I kind of just dig Steve Vai. I kind of like that he adds that weird element to Whitesnake. Maybe Whitesnake didn't need that, but I think that he brings that, and I enjoy it. Kind of like the same thing with Saigon Kick. Like I said, I like something that's a little bit off the wall, a little bit different, and I think he brought that to the Whitesnake thing. But at the end of the day, he didn't write the songs. And you know what, Anthony, the average music fan who was part of that group of the 8 million doesn't know the friggin' difference between John Sykes, Steve Vai, or Adrian Vandenberg. You know what I mean? So that's just a guitar nerd talking right there. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of this album. If you haven't listened to it in a long time, go back. It's a rocker. Slowpoke music. There you go. There's a deep track for you. But just go back, enjoy it. It's a fun album. It's pretty heavy. Yeah, that's all I got.
When I think of Whitesnake, I think of the big singles. I like their straight ahead rock when they do like Slide It In and Slow and Easy. Those are a couple songs. I love the 1987 album, and I do like the Slip of the Tongue album. I think because you and I are the kind of people that know so much about these bands. So I always was. I really felt bad for John Sykes because he wrote most of that album,
right?
The 1987 album, and he'd been with Coverdale for a number of albums, and here they're gonna break it big, and he gets fired. Doesn't even get to appear in the videos. Doesn't get to do the tour. So I really like Steve Vai. I think he seems like obviously if you get. Whitesnake is one of the biggest bands in the world at that time. I mean, what guitar player is going to turn down that opportunity? So he's part of a great album and a great tour. But, so I'm kind of in the John Sykes camp. He really got fucked over by David Coverdale. So, that's kind of my thoughts on Whitesnake. But yeah, it's a good, solid album. And it's kind of surprising that it only, went platinum. Which is obviously not a disappointment, but coming off the 87 album, you needed to sell 4 or 5 million copies in order to be a success.
And the thing is how many bands really had that huge album and they had another huge one right after? I mean, there ain't many. There ain't many. So I think people got to realize, these bands got to realize that, that was like lightning don't strike twice always. That was their big moment, and they can still be successful, but you're not going to have that moment again. That was the right time, the right music, the right everything, and to have that, you think 2 years later, 3 years later, whatever, that's going to happen again. It just ain't happening.
I mean, how many bands went multi-platinum more than twice? I mean, they're Poison did, but a lot of bands, sold Warrant had 2 double platinum albums, but most bands weren't going to sell 3 albums that went double platinum. Your major, huge ones, your Def Leppard, your Motley Crue, but there was a lot of bands that struggled to do that. So, to have a couple million sellers is, that's a career for most people.
Definitely. Well, brother, this was a fun conversation. I'm sure we'll do it again, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, hey, you know what? It was awesome, and again, I appreciate sharing my stuff on Twitter, and definitely let's do this again. Maybe we can do one on my channel sometime.
Definitely.
And, keep rocking, brother.
All right, man. Have a good night.
Well, that was great chatting with Anthony. Hope you enjoyed it. Rock on!